At 25,000 feet over Germany, the sky was no longer empty space. It was a measured grid of death, flak bursts, calculated to the second. One P-51 pilot inverted his aircraft and shattered the mathematics of German gunnery. February, deep winter over central Germany. At altitude, the cold was absolute. It pressed through aluminum skin, through flight gloves, through muscle and bone. The air at 25,000 feet was thin enough to steal power from engines and clarity from the mind. Below, the Reich unfolded in hard geometry, rail lines, rivers, factory grids, each one already measured, plotted, and defended. This was not open sky, it was a firing solution, waiting to be completed. The P-51 Mustang moved steadily eastward, its long laminar wings slicing clean air, the Merlin engine holding a disciplined roar. Fuel gauges ticked downward, with quiet authority. The pilot remained motionless, not relaxed, not tense, conserved. Escort duty demanded patience. The bombers ahead were still minutes away from the target zone, and the most dangerous moments had not yet arrived. They never did announce themselves. They simply began. Far below, the first flak batteries were already awake. Crews stood at their stations in layered coats, hands on steel wheels and range dials, eyes fixed on optical predictors. Height, speed, vector, numbers were fed into mechanical brains that had been refined over years of war. Black shells were lifted, loaded, timed. Each gun was not aiming at an aircraft, but at a future position in space where an aircraft would be. The sky above the Mustang was being pre-written. The first bursts appeared as distant smudges, dark flowers opening and collapsing in silence, then closer, then surrounding. The air ahead turned granular, violent. Shockwaves slapped the fuselage, rattled rivets, blurred vision. Each explosion was not random. Each one was an answer to mathematics. The pilot felt it through the control column, through the seat, through the pressure in his chest. This was not a dogfight where instinct ruled. This was geometry versus flesh. Flak did not chase. It anticipated. He understood that remaining predictable meant remaining alive only briefly. Standard evasive action, minor altitude changes, shallow weaves, was already assumed by the guns below. Every escort pilot knew this. German flak doctrine was built on pattern recognition, on the idea that no pilot, under stress, would truly abandon instinct. The bursts tightened, marching closer, adjusting with each second of data. The Mustang surged forward into the box. The pilot did not pull away. He did not dive immediately. He waited, long enough for the guns to commit, long enough for the solution to lock. Then, with a controlled movement that ignored every natural signal in the body, he rolled the aircraft completely inverted. The horizon flipped. Sky became ground. Gravity reversed its demand. The flak bursts, perfectly timed for a right-side-up fighter, detonated into emptiness. For a brief, impossible moment, the Mustang flew upside down through a space the gunners had already abandoned, because no aircraft was supposed to be there. The sky did not pause, but the rules governing it had just been broken. By this stage of the war, the air over Germany had become a system rather than a battlefield. Every altitude band, every approach corridor, every river bend was integrated into a defensive lattice, refined through years of trial and loss. The Luftwaffe no longer relied solely on fighters to stop the bombers. Fuel shortages, pilot attrition, and mechanical fatigue had shifted the burden downward, onto the ground, onto steel, optics, and calculation. German flak was not improvisational. It was industrial. Heavy 88mm batteries were positioned in belts around industrial regions, transport hubs, and synthetic fuel plants. Their crews trained relentlessly on prediction, rather than reaction. They did not aim at aircraft. They aimed at empty sky that had been mathematically selected seconds into the future. When performed correctly, the aircraft simply flew into its own destruction. To counter this, The United States Army Air Forces had pushed escort fighters deeper into enemy territory than ever before. The arrival of the P-51 Mustang fundamentally altered the balance. With its Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, high-altitude performance, and exceptional range, it could stay with the bombers all the way to the target and back. But survivability did not come from specifications alone. It came from adaptation. Escort pilots learned quickly that German flak was conservative. It assumed discipline, smooth flight paths, predictable corrections. A pilot who behaved correctly gave the gunners exactly what they needed. The most dangerous place in the sky was not during wild maneuvering, but during calm, steady flight. Flying inverted was not a stunt. It was a violation of expectation. At high altitude, inverted flight imposed real costs. Oil systems strained, fuel flow shifted, vision narrowed as blood pressed toward the head. Control inputs reversed their logic, maintaining precise airspeed, while upside down required strength, training, and calm under physiological stress. Doing it while surrounded by timed explosions bordered on irrational. But irrationality was exactly what Flak could not calculate. German predictors adjusted for vertical changes, for shallow dives, even for sudden rolls. What they could not efficiently process was an aircraft that inverted itself and held the line, maintaining speed and vector while presenting an entirely reversed profile to the sky. The shell timers were already set. The bursts would still occur, but they would occur in the wrong place. This tactic was not doctrine. It was not taught in manuals. It emerged from repetition, after watching patterns form, after seeing Flak walk closer with each correction, after understanding that predictability was the true enemy. The pilot flying that Mustang had internalized this reality long before crossing the German border. He had learned that survival depended on refusing to behave like a data point. The inverted run was not a flourish. It was a calculated gamble against a system that trusted its own equations too much. Above Germany, that trust was about to be punished. The flak field intensified as the formation pressed deeper inland. What had begun as isolated bursts hardened into a corridor of explosions, layered by altitude and distance. The air ahead appeared textured, as if thickened by debris and shock. Each black cloud expanded outward with violent precision, then collapsed into fragments that clattered against the Mustang's skin. The aircraft was no longer flying through space. It was flying through calculation. The pilot held course just long enough for the batteries below to adjust. The flak pattern crept forward, walking methodically toward the Mustang's nose. Height estimates refined, fuse timing shortened. The predictor crews were doing their work well, too well. Then the roll came, clean, deliberate, unhurried. The horizon inverted and locked in place. The ground rose into the upper canopy, rivers and towns sliding into the wrong half of vision. The Merlin engine did not falter, but its vibration changed. A subtle unevenness transmitted through the airframe. Oil pressure flickered, then stabilized. Control pressure increased as gravity pressed blood toward the pilot's head. He tightened his core, forced breath through clenched discipline, and held the line. The flak bursts continued exactly as predicted, except now they bloomed below the inverted Mustang, their lethal geometry displaced by hundreds of feet. The shells detonated into air the aircraft had already passed through moments earlier. The corridor of death remained, but the Mustang was no longer aligned with it. German gunners reacted quickly, but not instantly. Optical tracking lagged as operators recalculated orientation. Range data briefly conflicted. The aircraft's silhouette behaved incorrectly against expectation, its altitude unchanged yet visually inverted. Predictors required new inputs. Shells already chambered could not be retimed. Seconds mattered. The Mustang cut through the gap. Shock waves still struck the airframe, but they were off-center now, glancing instead of direct. One burst cracked close enough to flex the wing, the impact ringing like a hammer blow through metal. Another showered fragments that rattled across the fuselage. but the lethal center of the flak box was behind him. The pilot rolled back upright only after clearing the densest fire, easing the aircraft into its natural attitude with controlled restraint. Blood returned downward, vision widened, the engine smoothed. There was no sense of triumph, only continuation. Behind him, the flak pattern adjusted again, but the moment was gone. The gunners had lost the timing window that mattered most. The Mustang rejoined the escort line, another aircraft among many, indistinguishable now from those that had never inverted at all. From the ground, there would be no report explaining why that fighter survived. The calculations would show nothing unusual, only a brief inconsistency in tracking that resolved itself too late. In the air, the lesson was already fixed. Flak did not miss because it was inaccurate. It missed because it was too certain. The escort remained over enemy territory longer than planned. Fuel consumption crept upward, unnoticed at first, then undeniable. The Mustang had burned extra reserves, holding inverted attitude, compensating for drag, maintaining engine stability under strain. The gauges did not dramatize the loss. They simply declined, one tick at a time, indifferent to risk. The return route offered no relief. Flak belts overlapped, defending not just targets but transit corridors. German doctrine assumed retreat paths. Batteries farther west were already adjusting elevation and timing based on projected exit vectors. The sky did not loosen its grip simply because the bombs had fallen. Fatigue settled in layers. Cold stiffened fingers. Neck muscles burned from hours of helmet weight and constant scanning. The pilot's breathing became measured and deliberate, conserving oxygen and clarity. There would be no second inversion without consequence. The body had limits even if the aircraft did not. As the Mustang crossed another defended region, bursts climbed rapidly, faster than before. The flak was closer now, tuned to escort altitude rather than bomber mass. Fragment spray hissed past the canopy. A shock wave slammed the tail, momentarily blurring control response. The aircraft remained intact, but tolerance was narrowing. This time the pilot did not invert fully. Instead he rolled partially, skewing the aircraft's profile, just enough to disrupt timing, without inducing prolonged strain. The maneuver lacked the clean defiance of the earlier inversion, but it forced a miscalculation. Bursts erupted slightly high. Enough ammunition counters remained untouched. There were no enemy fighters to engage. This was not a battle of gunfire. It was a contest of endurance against an invisible opponent that never tired, never doubted, never felt fear. Fuel warning lights flickered near the German border. The pilot leaned the mixture, adjusted throttle, accepted reduced power. Speed bled away. Altitude became negotiable. Every decision was now weighted, not by aggression, but by arithmetic. When friendly territory finally appeared beneath the nose, it did not arrive with relief. It arrived with silence. The engine coughed once, then steadied, running on margins thin enough to feel through the rudder pedals. The Mustang crossed the coast low and fast, well below flak altitude now. The sky finally empty of bursts. There was no pursuit, no acknowledgement. The danger had ended without ceremony. The pilot landed with fuel reserves measured in minutes. The breaking point had passed without drama, but it had been reached all the same. There was no debrief devoted to the inversion. No diagram drawn on a chalkboard. No doctrine revised overnight. The mission report recorded only the measurable facts. Escort completed. Aircraft returned. No combat damage sustained. In a war that cataloged success by tonnage, dropped and losses avoided. The moment passed without formal recognition, yet it did not disappear. Among escort pilots, patterns were noticed long before they were written down. Survivability was compared quietly, not in boasts but in absence. Who returned more often, who passed repeatedly through flak belts without visible damage. The lesson was not that inverted flight was safe. It was that predictability was lethal. German flak units continued to refine their systems, improving optics, tightening fuse tolerances, accelerating data transfer between spotters and guns. But the core limitation remained unchanged. Prediction required assumption. Assumption required behavior. And behavior, when violated deliberately and briefly, created windows no machine could immediately close. The inverted run became part of a larger understanding, rather than a single tactic. Abrupt attitude changes, delayed corrections, holding an incorrect posture longer than instinct allowed. These were not instructions. They were tendencies adopted by pilots who understood that survival depended on thinking laterally inside a three-dimensional killing field. The P-51 Mustang itself earned no credit for this adaptation. Its reputation was built on range, speed, and combat dominance. But its stability, its responsiveness, and its ability to tolerate brief violations of aerodynamic comfort made such maneuvers possible. Not every fighter could survive that stress. Not every pilot could endure it. German gunners reviewing post-mission data would have seen nothing to explain the miss. Shells detonated at the correct altitude. Timers functioned properly. The aircraft simply failed to occupy the space it was expected to occupy. From the ground, that looked like chance. From the cockpit, it was intent. By the final months of the war, the skies over Germany belonged increasingly to the escorts. Flak remained dangerous, but its dominance waned as predictability eroded. The air war was not won by one maneuver or one aircraft, but by thousands of small violations of expectation, accumulated until the system defending the Reich could no longer adapt quickly enough. The pilot who flew inverted through Flak did not change the war alone, but he demonstrated something essential, that in a conflict ruled by calculation, survival sometimes depended on refusing to behave correctly. Above Germany, the sky had been solved, until someone chose to fly through it upside down.